Magic is a force of wonder in fantasy, majestic, boundless, and capable of reshaping reality. It is the spirit of nature, the elements in harmony, the essence of creation. In stories, magic allows castles to float, mythical creatures to roam, and heroes to wield unimaginable power. Yet, in the real world, magic is not a force of nature but an illusion, an art of deception performed through sleight of hand, misdirection, and meticulous skill. Earth's magicians do not summon fire or heal wounds, instead, they master tricks that astonish audiences, making objects disappear, levitating, or performing feats of seemingly impossible transformations. But behind these illusions lies a delicate balance of precision and danger. A single misstep can turn a performance into disaster. While magic entertains, it also has a darker side. Those same skills that amaze can be used for deception, manipulation, and crime. The allure of magic is both captivating and perilous, drawing in those with an insatiable curiosity. Lucas Chandler was one such individual. A young boy in a cluttered bedroom, Luke discovered his fascination with magic through a simple online tutorial. One evening, he stumbled upon a video demonstrating how to make a coin vanish. Enthralled, he watched the magician on screen explain the art of misdirection and technique. With eager determination, Luke attempted the trick, fumbling at first, dropping the coin multiple times. But he was undeterred. As the city lights flickered outside his window, Luke practiced relentlessly, studying every movement, every subtlety. Hours passed, and finally, he succeeded. The coin vanished from his palm, and for the first time in a long while, a genuine smile lit up his face, one even he had not known he could make. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Yet, his movements were still imperfect, lacking the fluid grace of a seasoned magician. Determined to refine his craft, Luke continued practicing into the night, unaware that this newfound passion was setting him on a path that would blur the line between illusion and reality. Magic, in all its wonder and deception, had taken root in his life. And for Luke, this was just the beginning of a journey filled with both brilliance and darkness. Luke Chandler's life was anything but ordinary. Every evening, the same routine played out, his parents, John and Karen, screaming at each other in a never-ending battle of resentment. Their apartment was a battlefield, and Luke was the unwilling spectator, forced to endure their rage. Tonight was no different. John, slurring from alcohol, spat insults at Karen, while she hurled them back with equal venom. The arguments had long lost their impact on Luke. He simply checked the clock, 8 p.m., right on schedule. To escape, Luke plugged in his earphones and drowned out the chaos with a YouTube tutorial on magic tricks. A magician's calm voice guided him through the steps of a coin vanish, a stark contrast to the turmoil in the next room. Luke followed along, his hands steadying as he mimicked the magician's movements. Magic was his sanctuary, a world of control, precision, and wonder, unlike the mess he lived in. The fight ended as it always did. John stormed out, slamming the door, and Karen's sobs filled the silence. Luke didn't react. He simply kept practicing, making the coin disappear over and over again. The moonlight illuminated his scattered playing cards and coins, tiny remnants of the world he was trying to create for himself. Morning came too soon, his alarm clock tearing through the fragile peace. Luke groggily prepared for school, his home empty as always, no breakfast, no goodbyes, just silence. He retrieved money from his makeshift piggy bank, a collection of small bills and coins he had taken from his parents when they weren't looking. They never noticed. The walk to school was a familiar one, a path he could take blindfolded. School itself was no better than home. Luke was the outcast, the invisible one. His desk, isolated at the back of the classroom, was a symbol of how unwanted he was. His classmates never called him by name, only insults like retard or scum. Even the teachers hesitated when speaking to him, as if his existence was a stain they wanted to ignore. Luke endured the whispers, the stares, the occasional shove in the hallway. He didn't fight back, he simply retreated into his world of illusions. During class, while others wrote notes and chatted, he shuffled his deck of cards beneath his desk, the rhythmic motion keeping him grounded. The final bell rang. Another day survived. Luke walked home, his mind drifting to dreams of escape, of a future beyond this suffocating existence. As he entered his decaying apartment, the silence was deafening. He locked himself in his room, resuming his tricks, losing himself in the delicate art of deception. Luke's life was a cruel paradox. Magic, an illusion by nature, was the only real thing he had. It gave him control in a world that offered none. It made him feel seen, even if only by himself. And for now, that was enough to keep him going. Luke's home was filled with the same toxic arguments between his parents, John and Karen, their voices echoing through the thin walls. Without his phone to drown out the chaos, thanks to school bullies who had broken it, he felt trapped. Desperate to escape, he climbed out of his bedroom window and into the cool night air. Wandering the dimly lit streets, Luke stumbled upon a small crowd gathered around a street magician. The man's skill was mesmerizing, coins vanished, cards appeared from thin air, and minds were read with an uncanny charm. For the first time in a long while, Luke felt something beyond despair, hope. He watched closely, studying every movement, every sleight of hand. When the magician asked for a volunteer, Luke stepped forward, eager for a taste of real magic. The magician guided Luke through a simple card trick, and when he completed it, a silver coin had somehow appeared in his hand. The crowd cheered, but Luke barely noticed. He was transfixed by the token in his palm. The magician's knowing smile lingered in his mind as he slipped away into the night, leaving Luke with a newfound sense of purpose. Inspired, Luke found a quiet spot under a street lamp and began practicing the tricks he had just witnessed. His hands were unsteady, and his technique was far from perfect, but each attempt brought him closer to mastery. He spoke to an imaginary audience, his voice gaining confidence with each trick. The coin, a symbol of possibility, gave him the motivation to keep going, to believe that he could one day perform just like the street magician. Hours passed unnoticed. The moon hung high, casting a serene glow over the empty streets. Luke lost himself in the repetition of shuffling, vanishing, and reappearing objects, his mind temporarily free from the weight of his reality. He imagined himself standing before an enraptured audience, making them gasp in wonder. Unlike school, where he was ignored and bullied, here, in his mind's stage, he was seen. As the first light of dawn crept into the sky, Luke reluctantly made his way back home. He climbed through his window, heart still racing from the night's excitement. Lying in bed, he held the silver coin up to the faint sunlight, watching how it reflected tiny beams across his wall. It wasn't just a coin, it was proof that there was more to life than what he had known. For the first time in years, he smiled as he drifted off to sleep, dreaming of a world where magic wasn't just an escape but a way forward. The road ahead was uncertain, but with every trick he practiced, he felt like he was taking a step closer to something greater. The illusion of happiness might have been fleeting, but the magic in his hands was real, and that was enough to keep him going. Luke sat at the back of the classroom, shuffling his deck of cards, indifferent to the excitement of report day. His classmates eagerly awaited their parents, but Luke knew his seat would remain empty as always. His parents had never shown up before, and today would be no different. To pass the time, he lost himself in practicing his magic tricks, the familiar sleight of hand a small comfort in his isolated world. As the classroom emptied, Mrs. Jenkins, his teacher, glared at him with growing irritation. His parents' absence meant she had to stay behind, and it was clear she resented him for it. Finally, when the last student had left, she called him forward, her voice dripping with disdain. She berated him for failing his exams, mocking him for hiding in the bathroom instead of taking them. Luke recalled that day, locked away with his deck of cards, finding solace in magic rather than facing inevitable failure. Mrs. Jenkins's words grew crueler, branding him a failure, worthless, and pathetic. Luke sat in silence, absorbing her venom without reaction. When she finally dismissed him, he left without a word, walking through the now empty halls, the familiar weight of loneliness pressing on him. He clutched the silver coin in his pocket, a reminder of the street magician's skill, a symbol of hope, however faint. As he walked home, an unshakable unease settled over him. Something felt wrong. His steps grew heavier as he reached the small apartment he shared with his parents. The door was ajar, unusual, since they were always paranoid about locking it. Hesitantly, he pushed it open. Inside, horror awaited. His father's body hung from the ceiling, the rope tight around his neck. Below him, his mother lay motionless on the floor, a deep gash across her throat, a bloody knife nearby. The scene was grotesque, a tragedy Luke couldn't process. His parents had met their end in violence and despair, his father killing his mother before taking his own life. Shock paralyzed him. He wanted to scream, to cry, but his body refused to move. His mind reeled, grasping for logic in the madness. Time blurred as he stood frozen, staring at the nightmare before him. With trembling hands, Luke fumbled for his phone, his fingers barely managing to dial emergency services. His voice faltered as he whispered his address, unable to fully articulate what had happened. As the operator spoke, his phone slipped from his grasp, and he collapsed to the floor. For the first time, Luke felt truly, utterly alone. The neglect and loneliness he had known all his life had now manifested in the most brutal way possible. The spark of hope he had clung to, fueled by magic and illusion, flickered weakly, threatened by the overwhelming darkness closing in around him. The night was shattered by the arrival of emergency responders, their sirens wailing as police and paramedics flooded the crime scene. The grim reality of the murder-suicide was evident. Luke's father had hanged himself after killing his mother. Detectives Harris and Mendoza assessed the situation, their disdain clear for the parents who had failed their child. Meanwhile, Luke sat motionless in the living room, wrapped in a blanket as paramedics Jenny and Mike spoke to him gently. His shock made it difficult to process their words, but their kindness was a stark contrast to the trauma he had endured. When asked if he had any family to call, his quiet no confirmed his complete isolation. Child Protective Services was contacted, and Luke was taken to a children's shelter to await a decision on his future. The following days blurred together. Authorities quickly ruled the case a murder-suicide, and while the media covered the tragedy briefly, it was soon forgotten. Luke, however, couldn't escape it. He spent his nights in a shelter, refusing to engage with other children, retreating into his magic tricks as a means of coping. His assigned social worker, Mrs. Williams, saw the difficulty in placing him in foster care due to his age. She encouraged him to consider stability, but Luke had no family and refused the idea of a traditional home. Determined to prove his independence, Luke proposed making a living through street magic. While Mrs. Williams was skeptical, she found a compromise, a work-study program that would allow him to continue his education while earning a small income. She also secured him a spot in transitional housing, giving him a temporary place to stay. Despite these efforts, Luke gravitated towards the streets, feeling more at home performing magic for passing crowds than in structured housing. His illusions became his means of survival, entertaining strangers in exchange for spare change. He refined his craft, finding solace in the applause and fleeting moments of connection with his audience. As the summer ended, the looming reality of school remained. Mrs. Williams continued trying to keep him within the system, but Luke had already chosen his path. The city streets had become his stage, and survival his new reality. One night, as he lay in a quiet alley, using his backpack as a pillow, he reflected on the journey ahead. Fear and uncertainty loomed, but so did the faint spark of hope. He had lost everything, his family, his home, but in the emptiness, he found something new, determination. With only his magic and his will to survive, Luke closed his eyes, ready to carve out a life of his own, one trick at a time. Years after the tragedy that left him orphaned, Luke, now in his early 20s, finds himself in a dimly lit police interrogation room, his wrists cuffed to the table. The officers, well aware of his history of theft and street performance, accuse him of stealing again. Calm and calculating, Luke denies the charges, knowing they lack evidence to arrest him. Despite their frustration, the officers release him with a warning, vowing to catch him eventually. As he steps out into the cold night, the weight of his choices presses down on him, but he knows nothing will change. This is the life he has built. Luke's phone buzzes, displaying a familiar name, Mrs. Williams, the persistent social worker who has been his only consistent supporter since his teenage years. She expresses concern over his latest police encounter, urging him to abandon street life and accept her help. Luke, however, remains detached, convinced that magic is the only thing keeping him sane. The worn smartphone he holds, a relic of his parents' final fight, is a reminder of his past and the life he has refused to let go of. Mrs. Williams pleads with him to reconsider his path, emphasizing that there are ways to build a better future. Luke, though appreciative of her kindness, insists he can manage on his own. His deep-seated fear of attachment prevents him from accepting help, and the idea of trusting someone feels foreign and dangerous. Despite knowing she genuinely cares, he cannot bring himself to believe he deserves more than the life he leads. As he walks through the city streets, he glimpses moments of normalcy, people laughing in cafes, enjoying the warmth of companionship. A flicker of longing rises in him, but he quickly buries it. The ghosts of his past, the betrayals, and the neglect have conditioned him to survive alone. Mrs. Williams' unwavering support lingers in his mind, a small beacon in his darkness, yet he refuses to reach for it. Luke grips the trinkets and playing cards in his pockets, reminders of the only thing he trusts, his craft. The road ahead remains uncertain, but he knows one thing: he will keep moving forward, clinging to his magic, one step at a time. Luke, dressed in a black tuxedo, stood on a busy street, his well-kept suit symbolizing the grace and mystery of his craft. By his side was a weathered briefcase, his mobile magic workshop, equipped with hidden compartments and props essential for his performances. With a practiced motion, he set up his makeshift table stand, drawing a small crowd eager for a momentary escape from their routines. He began with a card trick, seamlessly shuffling and revealing a chosen card with an elegant flourish. His hands, honed by years of practice, manipulated coins effortlessly, making them vanish and reappear. The children's delighted laughter and the parents' amused smiles gave him a sense of purpose. Each trick flowed smoothly into the next, silk handkerchiefs changing colors, coins defying gravity, and delicate flowers appearing from thin air. Despite the hardships of his life, these performances offered a fleeting sense of stability and connection. The applause and wonder in his audience's eyes reassured him that, even in his transient existence, he mattered. At the end of the show, he collected his earnings, $22, a modest sum, but enough for a meal. Packing up his briefcase with meticulous care, he made his way back to the alley he called home. His stomach grumbled as he walked, leading him to a familiar kebab stand. The scent of grilled meat filled the air, making his mouth water. He ordered a meal, found a quiet bench, and savored the warmth of the food. As he ate, he reflected on his life. Performing on the streets had been far from the adventure he had imagined, but magic remained his anchor, his only certainty in an otherwise uncertain world. Leaning back on the bench, he gazed at the sky, the city's lights dulling the stars. His thoughts wandered to Mrs. Williams, the social worker who had never given up on him. Despite his constant refusals, she continued to offer help. Luke knew she meant well, but relying on others was something he had long since learned to avoid. Trust led to disappointment, and disappointment was a luxury he couldn't afford. Magic was his escape, his defiance against the harshness of reality. Each trick he performed was more than just sleight of hand, it was a declaration of his resilience. Yet, he couldn't ignore the struggles of life on the streets. Hunger, cold nights, and the constant need to be alert to danger were his daily challenges. Even so, magic gave him purpose, a reason to keep going. His thoughts turned to the dreams he seldom allowed himself to dwell on. He envisioned himself on grand stages, captivating audiences beyond the transient crowds of the street. But those dreams felt distant, almost unattainable. Still, a fragile hope remained. If nothing else, that hope was enough to keep him practicing, perfecting his craft, and believing, however faintly, that a better future might still be possible. Luke, a street magician surviving on his wits, clutched his briefcase, a symbol of his dreams and struggles, as he sat on a cold bench, watching the city wind down. His life was a cycle of performances, fleeting applause, and quiet solitude. But tonight, hunger and necessity pushed him toward a different kind of sleight of hand. As he made his way back to his alley, he encountered a group of rough-looking men, loud, aggressive, the kind who thrived on intimidation. Luke had a personal code: he never stole from the innocent, but men like these? They were fair game. With expert skill, he brushed past one, seamlessly lifting a wallet without breaking stride. A few steps later, his heart pounded as he confirmed a decent sum inside, enough to keep him fed for a few days. He discarded the wallet and continued on his way, relief settling in. However, fate was unkind tonight. The men reappeared under a flickering streetlight, scanning the area. Luke's stomach dropped when one of them spotted the stolen wallet still in his hand. His usual caution had slipped, and now he was in trouble. Rage filled the gangsters' faces as they charged toward him, cursing and vowing revenge. Luke didn't hesitate, he ran. The chase tore through the city streets, adrenaline surging as he weaved through alleys and side roads. He knew the terrain well, but the men were relentless. He turned a sharp corner and spotted a fire escape. With practiced agility, he grabbed the ladder and climbed swiftly. From the rooftop, he could see the gangsters splitting up, their shouts echoing below. He crouched low, listening, waiting. The voices gradually faded. With a deep breath, Luke made his way across the rooftops, knowing he needed a new place to sleep. The thrill of escape still lingered, but the risks were growing. This life built on magic, trickery, and survival wasn't just about street performances, it was about outwitting dangers in the shadows. Finally, he descended back to street level, thinking he was safe. But as he rounded a corner, he crashed into one of the gangsters. Recognition flashed in the man's eyes, followed by a sinister grin. Well, look who we have here. Luke's stomach twisted. Without a second thought, he bolted. The chase was back on, and this time, survival would require more than just quick hands, it would take everything he had. Luke fled through the dimly lit streets, heart pounding as the gangsters pursued him. He had always prided himself on his skill, his ability to lift wallets unnoticed, his mastery of sleight of hand. But tonight, he had been sloppy. The thrill of the steal had turned into sheer terror as his pursuers closed in. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Was this life really his only option? He had justified his theft by targeting those who preyed on others, but tonight's close call made him question whether he was truly different from them. As he darted down an alley, the familiar face of Mrs. Williams surfaced in his thoughts. The kind-hearted woman had always tried to steer him away from this path, insisting he was meant for more than a life of crime. Her words haunted him now, mixing with the adrenaline of the chase. She had once told him that helping even one person could change the world for them. Luke had scoffed at the idea then, but now, facing the consequences of his actions, he wished he had listened. Suddenly, the gangsters halted, their shouts drowned out by the blaring horn of a lorry. Luke barely had time to react before he found himself on a busy road, headlights glaring in his eyes. Frozen, he saw his life flash before him, the scared boy at the police station, the times he had brushed off Mrs. Williams' advice, the moments he had ignored the possibility of change. He didn't want to die. He wanted to make things right, to prove he was more than a petty thief. Tears welled in his eyes as regret crashed over him. He whispered a sorrowful apology to Mrs. Williams, knowing she had been the only one who truly believed in him. Across town, Mrs. Williams sat at her kitchen table, sipping tea, thinking of Luke. She had always worried about him, fearing he would never escape his cycle of theft and survival. But she still held hope. When the phone rang, her heart leapt. Maybe it was Luke, finally ready to change. But Luke's fate was already sealed. The screeching brakes, the blaring horn, all of it culminated in deafening silence. His world went dark, leaving behind only the unspoken sorrow of a woman who had seen the good in him and the painful question of what might have been had he chosen a different path. Luke, suspended in darkness, makes a vow to change if given another chance, to help others rather than pushing them away, to live a life that would make Mrs. Williams proud. As this promise cements in his mind, he jolts awake, drenched in sweat. Expecting to find himself injured or dead after the truck collision, he instead discovers that he is completely unharmed. Panic sets in as he realizes he is no longer in the city but in an unfamiliar forest filled with towering, iridescent trees. The air is different, thick with an earthy scent, and the landscape is eerily silent. Disoriented and struggling to grasp his situation, Luke forces himself to move, stepping cautiously through the dense foliage. The surreal environment unsettles him. The trees and plants, though vaguely familiar, feel almost alien. He questions whether he is dead, caught in the afterlife, or if this is some elaborate nightmare. He had never believed in divine intervention, but the impossible nature of his surroundings challenges his skepticism. Luke soon stumbles upon two objects that ground him in reality, his briefcase and his smartphone. A surge of relief washes over him as he grabs them, his only tangible connection to his past life. However, upon powering on his phone, he finds that its interface has changed. The time is unrecognizable, most apps are locked, and the battery percentage is missing. Yet, curiously, he has full reception, hinting at some kind of connectivity. This anomaly weakens the afterlife theory, surely there wouldn't be Wi-Fi in the hereafter. Before he can contemplate further, an eerie grunt pierces the silence. Luke's breath hitches as he spots a deer at the clearing's edge. But something is wrong. The animal, rather than retreating, steadily approaches him. Its gaze is too intelligent, too calculating. A shiver crawls down Luke's spine as the deer stops a few feet away. Then, in a grotesque spectacle, its face splits open, revealing rows of jagged, unnatural fangs dripping with viscous liquid. The air fills with a rancid stench. Luke watches in horror as the creature's transformation continues. Hooves twist into clawed hands, limbs elongate unnaturally, and its back contorts, turning the once graceful creature into a monstrous, towering abomination. Frozen in terror, Luke's senses scream at him, this is no dream. The creature takes another step forward, its jaws snapping ominously. Luke's survival instincts finally kick in. His fingers clutch the handle of his briefcase, and without hesitation, he bolts. The deafening roar behind him solidifies a terrifying realization: this is no mere nightmare, nor is it the afterlife. This is something far worse, something real. Luke's pulse hammered in his ears as he fled through the ominous forest, every frantic step echoing in the dark. Dressed in a black tuxedo ill-suited for a chase, his polished brogues clacked against the rough terrain, and his briefcase, a container of his magic props and precious memories, thumped against his thigh with each stride. The forest was a chaotic blur of glowing, iridescent leaves and tangled shadows as a grotesque creature, once a deer now twisted into a monstrous abomination, pursued him relentlessly. Its heavy, guttural breaths and the sound of elongated, clawed limbs pounded like a drumbeat of impending doom. Luke's lungs burned and his muscles screamed in protest, yet the terror of capture propelled him forward. Desperation guided his steps as he darted through narrow alleys of dense undergrowth, branches lacerating his suit and skin. Amid the cacophony of snapping twigs and rustling leaves, he formulated a plan, a desperate dash toward a large hollow tree that offered a glimmer of refuge amid the chaos. With a burst of energy, he sprinted for the tree. Just as he reached its gaping entrance, the creature lunged, snapping its jaws and seizing his cherished tuxedo jacket in its maw. Yanked violently from his path, Luke's body momentarily hung in midair before he managed to free himself, leaving his jacket to be torn asunder by the beast. In a frantic scramble, he recovered his briefcase from within the hollow and dove inside, pressing himself against the rough bark as the monster prowled just beyond the opening. Every nerve in his body screamed in terror as the creature's glowing eyes and foul breath invaded the confined space. After what felt like an eternity, the beast, frustrated by its lost prize, turned away and lumbered back into the forest, its menace slowly receding into shadow. Alone and trembling in the dim interior of the tree, Luke allowed himself a brief moment of respite. His suit was ruined, his body battered, but his resolve remained unbroken. In that heavy silence, his mind churned with the weight of survival. This ordeal had pushed him to the very edge. With determination kindled by the promise he had once made to Mrs. Williams, he vowed then that he would transform his life. Even as fear clutched his heart, he resolved to navigate this strange, perilous world, determined to honor his promise by forging a new path, one where every step, no matter how painful, would lead him toward a future he could be proud of. Luke awakens groggy and disoriented in a dark, twisted forest, unsure whether a new day has begun or time still stands still in this perpetual twilight. The gnarled trees and eerie glow of their leaves offer no clue of passage, only deepening his sense of isolation and hunger. With a heavy heart and trembling hands, he retrieves the tattered remnants of his once prized jacket, now a shredded memory of his past, and carefully folds and secures it in his briefcase. This small act of preservation serves as a reminder of what he once was and the promise he made to himself and Mrs. Williams, to change, to help others, and to live a life of purpose. Determined to leave the hollow tree that had been his temporary refuge, Luke steps cautiously into the unknown. Every step through the maze-like forest, with its uneven ground and strange, pulsing plants, is measured and deliberate. The silence around him is broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant whisper of voices that seem almost musical in quality. These faint sounds spark hope within him. Perhaps there are others in this bizarre realm who might offer help or guidance. As he follows the narrow path indicated by the elusive voices, a low, menacing growl suddenly shatters the uneasy calm. Instantly, Luke ducks behind a tree, heart pounding, and peers out to see a massive tiger emerging from the shadows. What makes the sight even more surreal is that the tiger is harnessed with leather straps and attached to a wooden carriage, a contraption that hints at the presence of human hands in this otherwise uncanny wilderness. The animal's powerful, controlled gait both alarms and fascinates him, stirring a mix of dread and curiosity about who might command such a beast. Gathering his courage, Luke edges toward the carriage, desperate for a sign of life. He knocks and calls out for help, but the door remains silent and the carriage empty. His hope is quickly replaced by despair as a distant, familiar roar echoing the terror of the monstrous deer that had once hunted him reminds him that danger is never far behind. Overwhelmed by fear and uncertainty, he slumps against the carriage, torn between the impulse to flee and the resolve to honor his promise of transformation. In this moment of bleak isolation, with the forest's haunting sounds closing in around him, Luke resolves that he must keep moving. He will continue his quest for survival and answers, determined to find a way out of this nightmarish realm and to prove that the promise he made to change, to help others, and to make Mrs. Williams proud was not made in vain. Every step forward, however perilous, is a step toward a future where his past no longer defines him, and even in the face of overwhelming mystery and danger, hope and determination light his path. Luke cowers in fear beside a carriage as the monstrous Erdyke roars through the forest. He had survived a past encounter with the creature by sheer luck, and the thought of facing it again terrifies him. However, when he hears a man's distant shout, his promise to help others resurfaces, clashing with his instinct to flee. Summoning his courage, he forces himself to move toward the sound. Jogging through the dense forest, Luke struggles against fear and exhaustion. The abomination's roars and the man's urgent cries grow louder. Pushing through a thicket, he emerges into a clearing where he sees a man wielding a sword, attempting to protect an injured tiger from the Erdyke. Though Luke initially questions why anyone would risk their life for an animal, he recalls Mrs. Williams' teachings about kindness and resolve. Determined to help, he rushes forward despite the man's shouts for him to run. Thinking quickly, Luke uses his phone's flashlight, rapidly flashing the light at the beast. The sudden bursts of brightness disorient it, and after a tense moment, the creature retreats. Relieved, Luke collapses, overwhelmed by his success. The armored man, astonished, helps him up and expresses his gratitude while questioning his reckless bravery. When Luke asks about the monster, the man explains that it is an Erdyke, a rare and deadly shapeshifter feared throughout the land. He then looks at Luke with newfound respect, assuming him to be a mage due to his ability to create light. Misinterpreting the term, Luke agrees, believing the man is referring to stage magicians. The man is in awe, explaining that mages, witches, and saints are thought to be nearly mythical, aside from the revered Saint Cynthia of the Empire of Varentia. Realizing the Erdyke could return, they turned their attention to the wounded tiger. The man, demonstrating medical skill, cleans and bandages the injury, calming the tiger, which appears to trust him. Luke is impressed by his competence and the strong bond he shares with the beast. The man introduces the tiger as Tora and assures Luke that he will recover. Before they depart, the man suggests they travel together, emphasizing that Luke's magic will be useful for protection. Luke agrees, feeling a growing sense of camaraderie. As they set off into the forest, the threat of the Erdyke remains, but Luke's resolve strengthens. He will survive in this world and uphold his promise, no matter what dangers lie ahead. Luke, Gareth, and Tora, the injured tiger, made their way back to the carriage. Despite Tora's patched-up wound, their progress was slow. The forest was eerily silent, with only their footsteps breaking the stillness. As they walked, Luke couldn't help but ask Gareth why he wasn't more alarmed about discovering that he was a mage. Gareth remained calm, explaining that fear wouldn't help their survival, especially with the Erdyke still lurking. However, he admitted to being excited, as meeting a mage was incredibly rare, something only read about in ancient texts. Gareth explained that magic users were often feared and hunted. However, as a Noirist, his religion, Noirism, viewed mages, witches, and saints as divine gifts meant to guide and protect others. The powerful Varentia Empire shared these beliefs, but an opposing faction, the Anti-Noirists, saw magic users as a threat and sought to eliminate them. This revelation unsettled Luke, as it meant people might try to kill him simply for what he was. Gareth, however, reassured him that he would protect him, as Luke had saved both him and Tora. Reaching the carriage, they made camp for the night, as Tora needed time to heal before they could travel. Though Luke feared the Erdyke's return, Gareth assured him that the beast wouldn't revisit a place it had fled from. While preparing food, Gareth offered Luke some cooked meat, which he later revealed was black bear. Though surprised, Luke ate it without complaint. They finally introduced themselves: Luke Chandler, who preferred to be called Luke due to painful memories of his given name, and Gareth Wingate. With a newfound camaraderie, they settled near the fire, understanding that the dangers of the forest were far from over. As the night deepened, Luke lay awake, staring at the unfamiliar constellations above. The past day's events weighed on him: the terrifying Airdyke, Gareth's religious knowledge, and the strange power of his phone's flashlight. He pondered his mysterious arrival in this world, wondering if it was fate or something else. He thought of Mrs. Williams and the promise he had made, finding comfort in the idea that helping Gareth and Tora might bring him closer to fulfilling it. As exhaustion took hold, the fire's warmth and the steady presence of his companions allowed him to drift into a deep sleep. For now, the forest granted them peace, offering a brief respite from the perilous journey ahead. At dawn, soft sunlight filtered through a dense, twisted canopy, scattering dappled patterns across the forest floor. Gareth stirred first, stretching languidly as he prepared for the day. With practiced calm, he tended to Tora, the loyal tiger whose injured hind leg still limped but showed determination as the beast drank eagerly from a rain-filled, inverted cone tree. Carefully, Gareth gathered his supplies from the old carriage and set aside a clean set of clothes for Luke, understanding that a fresh start was vital in this strange land. Luke, still heavy with sleep and haunted by memories of terror, slowly awoke to Gareth's gentle call. Disoriented at first, he soon recognized the peaceful morning as a welcome reprieve from the previous day's perils. As he changed into the fresh clothes, the unfamiliar fabric against his skin reminded him how different his world was from the one he now found himself in. Gareth's curiosity was piqued by Luke's modern attire: buttons, machine-made fabric, and all, and he asked about their origin. Luke explained, with hesitant awe, that he came from a place of advanced technology, where machines fashion clothes and cities buzzed with energy, a stark contrast to the ancient, natural rhythms of this realm. Gareth, a native of the city of Purewood, a bustling hub amid vast forests, and a devout follower of Noirism, shared stories of his homeland. He spoke of how their world was measured by the size of settlements and empires like Varentia, and how they revered legends, the great celestial light known as Avera and the scattered lights of the dead. His words, imbued with both pragmatism and wonder, painted a picture of a world where magic and tradition intertwined. Despite his lingering exhaustion, Luke felt a spark of hope. The conversation bridged the gap between two disparate worlds, as Gareth reassured him that even in this perilous forest, there was beauty and a chance for a new beginning. With Tora limping but determined, the trio resolved to press on. Gareth wisely suggested they rest until Tora's injuries healed enough for further travel, noting that the dreadful Airdyke was unlikely to return to a place it had already fled. They set up camp near the carriage. As Gareth built a small, steady fire and rummaged through his pack for provisions, he offered Luke a portion of black bear meat, a delicacy new to him. Though surprised by the flavor, Luke accepted it gratefully, savoring every bite as the warm firelight danced over their faces. Later, as the forest's ambient sounds and the soft crackle of the fire mingled with the cool night air, Luke reflected on his journey and the promise he had made to Mrs. Williams. In that quiet moment, surrounded by newfound allies and the gentle security of camp, he felt that even in a world filled with danger and mystery, hope could blossom anew. Together, they embraced this new dawn with cautious optimism, ready to face whatever challenges the day might bring. By the next morning, Tora had regained his strength, running and jumping with enthusiasm. Though his wound hadn't fully healed, he was strong enough to resume pulling the carriage. As Gareth and Luke prepared to leave the forest, Luke noticed something unusual. Gareth was feeding Tora plants instead of meat. Inspecting Tora closely, Luke realized the tiger had only molar teeth, similar to herbivores. Shocked, he questioned Gareth, who calmly explained that in this world, herbivores and carnivores were reversed. As the carriage moved through the thinning forest, Luke pondered the strange ecology of this world. The Airdyke, a predator in the form of a deer, and the carnivorous black bear Gareth hunted now made sense. Gareth, noticing Luke's contemplation, assured him that many more mysteries awaited discovery. Luke's resolve strengthened as he acknowledged his limited understanding of this world. As they traveled, Gareth retrieved a scroll from the back of the carriage, a map of the land. Luke examined it but was surprised to find the text unreadable. Gareth revealed that it was written in Iatspik, the language of the land. Luke, however, had been speaking fluently with Gareth all along. They realized that while Luke could speak the language effortlessly, its written form was completely foreign to him. This revelation deepened their understanding of Luke's origins. Gareth reflected on Luke's earlier stories about towering buildings, flying machines, and advanced technology. Initially, he believed Luke was from an unknown, highly developed region. Now, a more extraordinary theory emerged: Luke might be from another world entirely. Legends spoke of people descending from the skies, bringing knowledge beyond comprehension. Gareth mentioned Saint Cynthia, a living embodiment of such myths. Luke, still struggling to grasp his situation, admitted that while this world resembled his own, it operated under vastly different rules. Gareth, now convinced of Luke's otherworldly origins, emphasized the boundless nature of their world, where magic, monsters, and even visitors from beyond the skies were possible. The weight of the revelation settled between them, each lost in thought about the implications. As the forest gave way to rolling hills, Gareth pointed to a distant settlement, the village of Midhill, where they could gather supplies and information. Luke, still grappling with his reality, knew that survival depended on embracing this world's mysteries. As they pressed forward, an eerie howl echoed from the woods behind them. Gareth urged them to keep moving, and Luke, despite the unease curling in his chest, knew there was no turning back. The adventure ahead promised both peril and discovery, and he had no choice but to face it. As Luke and Gareth approached the village of Midhill, Luke took in its rustic simplicity. The village consisted of wooden cottages, a forge, a stable, and a warehouse, all built around a central well. However, he noticed the absence of a church, an oddity Gareth explained by revealing that the villagers were Antinwarists, people who rejected both saints and magic. This meant Luke had to be careful, as anything resembling magic could put them in danger. Upon entering the village, they were met with wary glances, especially because of Tora. The tiger's presence was unusual, and though his injuries had healed, the villagers remained on edge. Gareth led Luke through the village, stopping first at the blacksmith's forge to speak with Gregor, an acquaintance who provided them with a warm yet businesslike welcome. After ensuring Tora had a place to rest in the stables, despite the stable master's reluctance, they made their way to the village inn, where they secured lodging. Their temporary quarters were a small vacant cottage meant for traveling visitors. As they settled in, Luke's curiosity led him to ask Gareth about his connections in the village. Gareth explained that he had visited Midhill before and that Gregor was his most trusted contact there. The conversation soon shifted to Gareth's own journey. He had just completed his night training in the Empire of Varentia and was now returning to his hometown, the city of Purewood. This revelation surprised Luke, who had assumed their journey would lead them to the Empire. Gareth clarified their route using his map, pointing out their current location and their destination. He also highlighted the imposing presence of Varentia, home to Saint Cynthia, the ruler who was both queen and saint, reinforcing how significant magic and faith were in this world. With the plan settled, Gareth suggested they rest. As Luke lay in bed, his thoughts swirled with the challenges and mysteries of this new world. The village's rejection of magic, Gareth's deep knowledge of the land, and the daunting journey ahead all weighed on his mind. Yet, Gareth's confidence reassured him. Despite his uncertainty, Luke felt a growing determination to understand his place in this world. As the fire dimmed and the room filled with the quiet sounds of sleep, Luke found solace in the fact that, for now, he was not alone. The road ahead was uncertain, but with Gareth as his guide and Tora by their side, he was ready to face whatever lay beyond the horizon. As morning arrived, sunlight filtered through the small holes in the cottage walls, casting a dappled glow. Luke stirred and stretched before realizing with a jolt that Gareth was missing. A wave of unease settled in. Without Gareth, he felt vulnerable in the Antinwarist village. Hastily dressing, he peered through a hole in the wall, watching the villagers go about their morning routines. His anxiety eased when he spotted Gareth near the well, speaking with a burly man. Relieved, Luke hurried outside to join him, overhearing snippets of their conversation. Gareth was gathering information about the safest route to their next destination. When Luke questioned him, Gareth reassured him that they were safe as long as they kept a low profile. Their priority was preparing for the journey, ensuring Tora was ready and gathering supplies. Gregor, the blacksmith Gareth had spoken to the previous day, approached with news that the provisions were ready at the stable. Together, they walked through the bustling village streets to retrieve their supplies. Upon entering the stable, Luke was stunned to witness a world-defying sight: carnivorous animals peacefully munching on greenery. Wolves, a panther, and even bears contentedly chewed on hay, completely contradicting his understanding of predator-prey dynamics. Gareth, noticing his astonishment, explained that this was simply the norm in this world. As Gregor helped them load the supplies, Luke continued to marvel at the strange behaviors of the animals. Tora, meanwhile, appeared strong and ready for travel. With everything prepared, Gareth signaled their departure. Leaving Midhill behind, they traveled along a rugged path, the morning sun filtering through the dense canopy. Luke, now more comfortable with Gareth's company, asked about his travels. Gareth explained that as a knight in training, he often journeyed between villages, but now that his training was complete, his focus was on serving the city of Purewood. He viewed his role as more than just protecting people; he aimed to bridge gaps between different faiths and communities. As they rode, the terrain sloped upward, revealing a vast forest stretching toward mist-covered mountains. Gareth pointed out that their destination, Purewood, lay at the mountain base. The sight filled Luke with a mix of anticipation and determination. Though the mysteries of this world remained, he was no longer an outsider simply surviving; he was part of the journey. With Gareth and Tora beside him, he felt ready to face the challenges ahead, certain that each step brought him closer to understanding his place in this strange new world. As the carriage rolled along the forest path, Gareth and Luke conversed easily, their discussions shifting from mundane topics to deeper mysteries. Eventually, their talk turned to magic, with Luke inquiring about the abilities of mages, saints, and witches. Gareth, somewhat surprised by the question, recounted childhood memories of reading storybooks about magic, provided by Mayor Kingsley of Purewood, a strong believer in the Noirist faith. He explained that while magic could be used for simple tasks like conjuring fire or water, it also had a dark side: wars, destruction, and harm, which led to the rise of the anti-Noirist belief opposing magic's dangers. Gareth then brought up the incident with the Airdyke, insisting that Luke had summoned light to ward off the creature. Luke, eager to clear up the misunderstanding, retrieved his smartphone and demonstrated its flashlight, shocking Gareth with the technology. As Luke explained the phone's other capabilities, communication, images, and videos, Gareth struggled to comprehend the distinction between magic and technology, ultimately concluding that it must be a powerful magical item. Gareth elaborated on magical items, stating that they were created by gifted individuals and often feared. He mentioned Saint Cynthia of Varentia, whose healing scepter was a renowned magical artifact. Any discovered magical item was to be delivered to the Empire of Varentia for safekeeping, though anti-Noirists still destroyed them out of principle. Luke, intrigued, asked about power levels among such items, and Gareth speculated that Luke's smartphone might be the most powerful magical item he had ever encountered due to its multiple functions. Luke reflected on how something common in his world seemed extraordinary in Gareth's. Gareth then questioned Luke's origins, prompting Luke to open up about his past. He recounted a childhood marked by neglect, his parents' tragic deaths, and his struggles as an orphan. The only person who had tried to help him was Mrs. Williams, though he had initially resisted her kindness. His last memory before waking up in this world was being struck by a lorry, an enormous vehicle much larger than a carriage. Gareth, moved by Luke's hardships, revealed that he too was an orphan, abandoned at a cathedral and raised by Father Wingate in Purewood. Unlike Luke, he had accepted the help given to him. He speculated that fate had brought them together and that they both had a chance to change their lives for the better. A contemplative silence settled between them as they processed their conversation. Their bond strengthened, forged through shared hardships and a growing understanding. As the forest began to thin, revealing open terrain, the journey ahead remained uncertain, filled with challenges and discoveries yet to come. As dusk settled, Gareth and Luke set up camp, gathering firewood and starting a small fire. As they prepared their meal, Gareth casually offered Luke a choice between wolf or panther meat, an unfamiliar dilemma for Luke. After some hesitation, Luke chose wolf meat, while Gareth also cooked panther meat for comparison. During their meal, Luke explained how, in his world, cows, chickens, and pigs were common food sources, contrasting with Gareth's world, where these animals were considered monsters. Gareth was intrigued and contemplated the idea of consuming monster meat, referencing knight survival manuals that permitted eating defeated creatures in desperate times. As they ate, Luke found the wolf meat gamey but palatable, while the panther meat had a richer, more robust taste. The conversation deepened their understanding of each other's worlds, strengthening their bond. Later that night, Gareth awoke to a distant, unsettling sound. Instinctively, he doused the fire, grabbed his sword, and shook Luke awake. Tora, their tiger companion, whimpered and moved closer to the carriage. Gareth informed Luke of a nearby Plyberg, a monstrous, chicken-like predator with gnarly teeth. When Luke attempted to use his phone for light, Gareth stopped him, explaining that Plybergs were sensitive to light but completely deaf. As they crouched near the carriage, Luke questioned why they were whispering if the Plyberg was deaf. Gareth, though amused by the irony, insisted on caution. The Plyberg's eerie calls grew louder, sending shivers through both men. Eventually, the beast emerged from the shadows, revealing its terrifying form. Standing twice as tall as Gareth, it possessed rough, iridescent feather scales, a jagged, serrated beak filled with gnarly teeth, and formidable clawed talons. Its dragon-like wings, though incapable of flight, added to its intimidating presence. The Plyberg's serpentine neck swayed as it sniffed the air, flaring its nostrils in search of prey. Its guttural growl resonated through the night, an ancient and primal sound that awakened deep survival instincts in Luke and Gareth. Realizing a confrontation was inevitable, Gareth silently instructed Luke to stay low while Tora positioned himself protectively between them and the beast. The Plyberg's predatory gaze locked onto them, its muscular frame exuding raw power. Unlike their previous encounter with the Airdyke, they couldn't rely on light to escape. Stealth was their only advantage, but with the Plyberg closing in, Gareth knew that battle was unavoidable. His grip on his sword tightened as he braced for the looming fight, fully aware that this monstrous predator was unlike anything they had faced before.
That's it for today. For the full story, check out the complete novel on Comic Demon. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.